Okay, thanks everybody. So, before we get started, one quick caveat. We are not giving you financial advice. We are not financial planners. We are not lawyers. We are not accountants. We are telling you what we know and our experience. So no, you cannot sue us, and I don't want to hear about it. Good? Okay.
Also, are any of us retired?
None of us have done this well enough to retire.
Right, so we haven't made all the money yet, so we're still working on it too.
We're trying to take yours. I mean, we'll get as much as we can. So, before we do intros, I don't want to start with intros, but I kind of want to get a show of hands of a couple questions to kind of judge the audience before we start seeing who everyone is. So, how many people here have a comp plan that is just salary, just base plan? Okay. How many have a bonus structure on top of that? Oh, that's a lot. How many of you have a commission plan or sales based? Okay. Okay, now how many of you have some sort of equity that is built into that plan? Okay, so a pretty good engagement. That helps. Okay, so now we'll get into this and we'll be able to hopefully walk through some things that I think just don't get talked about enough. If you guys write kind of board, there's some stuff that is, we have a real short period of time to figure out when we're going to take that next job. We've already talked about when do you take the next job, should you go to your career, but then you say yes to an offer and you don't have a lot of time between then, or you get the offer, you don't have a lot of time to decide yes or no or how you want to negotiate it. So we're going to try to dig into a little bit of that. So starting, Jeremiah, you want to do a quick intro and we'll just go down the line.
All right, my name is Jeramiah Dooley. I work for the Microsoft Azure engineering team. Ron Saylor, I work for VMware in HCI. Jeff Polczynski, I am the Director of Solutions Architects at Island Platform Provider.
Jody Tyrus, Technical Account Manager for VMworld.
John Marrone, I work for VMware in the Worldwide Cloud Strategy.
And I'm Josh Atwell, and I'm an advocacy at school.
I think we did this already. 3 people that go from VMware, so we're really trying to get them on it.
Well, to be fair, I was at Gallup for a very, I said an 18-year time.
It's quite a long time. Okay, so let's start with this. You go through the whole process, you decided you really like this job. You want to take the job. What is the number one thing when you get an offer that you guys feel you should look at? It's the most important thing to each of you. Go ahead.
How much money do you actually need? That's the most important thing. First and foremost.
Shouldn't you know that before you come?
No, not necessarily. Because, all right, so here's the reason I bring this out. As you saw the comp plan, like, variations, right? You may go into a role where you are not familiar with that type of comp plan, and most people do not have a really good, solid understanding of how much money they're required to sustain themselves and their family and whatnot. And we also don't always have a good understanding of how much money our spouse and our family expects us to have in order to accomplish things. So you have to consider if I go to a startup or I go to a place where I'm commission-based or I'm going to be heavy on equity, low on salary, you need to actually identify what your floor is before making any decisions. Because one of the challenges I think a lot of people get in, and we were talking about in the last panel, like, go do something you're going to be excited and passionate about. Well, they don't always pay what you need to get paid. You shouldn't pay for this, I don't think, but you have to know what your floor is. That's what qualifying is.
Okay, that's all. What you doing?
I would agree. I think that was what my response is what is your base pay? Like, I was very upfront when I was interviewing with companies is that this is the lowest I'll go. If this is too high, then let's not waste each other's time. It makes sense. There's a lot of stuff that you can add on, a lot of icing on top of the cake, but if you can't meet my minimum requirements, it's not good.
So you use the term base salary. Are you saying that your base on your salary should be that, and anything else beyond that is the icing? Or are you including
Yeah.
bonus numbers? You're
So, and so, to Josh's point about, like, what kind of standard of living do I require, it's going to be different than somebody else in the same role because their circumstances are going to be different. So when I look at, like, what will make Jody happy, that's my baseline. Everything else makes Jody even happier.
Jeremiah, you had something you were reaching for.
Well, so it's interesting because it's kind of the same thing, but I think it's a very different mindset. The first thing I looked at is how much could I get? Oh, right? I mean, it's if I'm in a position where I'm having to worry about what my minimum number is that I'm negotiating for, then the best case that I can do is to get everything that they're giving me, right? And now I've got to worry about what do I do next year? You know, am I at the very top of whatever band of salary and compensation that you're putting me in? So when I was looking for a new position, where I started was by talking to people who had the role, by talking to people who worked with the company, and start to figure out what is the total amount that I can get, knowing that of course has to be above where the minimum is, because I know that I get to negotiate that salary one time. And if I want to renegotiate, the biggest lie I've ever been told by anyone hiring me for a job is take this salary, we'll fix it later. Right? Take this salary, we'll fix it in your next review. You get one chance to negotiate that. So when I walk in there, I want to know as well as I can what is the total amount of compensation that is possible for this role. Because if I'm only going to get one chance to negotiate it, I'm going to go for as high up that compensation stack as I can.
So I'm going to go right to the board for this question because I have a feeling this panel is going to have some definite questions. Can I negotiate when I get a job offer? Doesn't that look bad and take the offer away? Go ahead, any of you.
You should absolutely negotiate when you get a job offer. So I'm a hiring manager. I hire people across the globe. When I make an offer, it is at the lowest amount I'm willing to pay. You should always negotiate. You should negotiate vacation, you should negotiate sick time, and you should absolutely negotiate base pay.
I think that's right. Hey, everybody in the back, can any of you hear that? Yeah, I had that thought, negotiating. So that first one up there, it's not VMunderground yet. Keep it down a minute. People need to talk. So the answer was always, always, always negotiate. But I think one of you had the next follow-up.
I'm gonna add on to that.
Hold it close.
You really have one opportunity to do this and get it correct when you go in. And this is, unlike the community events, when you're working on a team, right, you kind of want to build people up around you. This is a very selfish event, right? You have to get what is best for you and your family at the time you can, when that conversation is open to interpretation, and you can go back and forth with some sort of discussion that makes sense for both parties.
So it came up about you can't, you only get to be mentioned. I'll fix it in next review. Is any of the negotiation ever, here's the number I'm doing now, I expect a review in this amount of time? Do you ever include that?
And then back to the last question, yes, you can negotiate, but you can't be crazy, right? I mean, it has to be reasonable.
You get there, right?
There are exceptions. But you also need to understand what the company that is trying to hire you, what state they're in, right? Do they have, are you their first choice? And if so, how close is their second choice? How close do you think their second choice is? Because if you come back, asking for another 50 grand on top of what they're willing to offer, they're just going to move to the next person.
Hold on. I'm going to counter on that a little bit. Because I went into a job, I had a number in mind that based on research of what I expected I should be paid for the role. I had my my floor number. I don't go basement, I don't want to get below that. Like I had my floor number, right? The amount that I had to have to support my family and to meet our objectives. And they came up with a number that was above my floor, but nowhere near what I thought I should be compensated. And so I told them that. And the number I had was like $45,000 over what they told me. They're like, well, we can't do that. And my response was, are you telling me I'm not worth that? I mean, I put it on the hiring manager to tell me flat out that I'm not worth it and explain why. And I mean, he potentially talked me down, but it wasn't likely. And his response was, no, you're definitely worth it. I'm just not authorized to give you that. I'll wait. That's exactly how it played out. And I got to the number, well, I got within $5,000 of the number I wanted. I got where I wanted to be, right? And so I forced that function of, I was willing to shoot higher, but they had to show me why I was wrong.
So you said that's how much you were worth. I don't know if you're going to jump on this one, but that last one down there, so how do you know how much you're worth and how much you asked for?
I'll just jump in here as the only female panel, but
So you're worth more than the rest of them?
I'm absolutely
Yes. Good answer.
Culturally, I think it's more difficult for women to go into their negotiation. I will be honest and I'll say, I've only negotiated once in my entire life for a salary, and that's this last position. Before, I was just happy to get the job offer. And so when I got an offer, I would just take it. Not that I didn't know you couldn't negotiate, I didn't want to lose the opportunity. And as I got older and more experienced and started to learn my value, when I come to me and the hunters look at me and they say, we'd like you to join, here's the offer, I'm like, well, here's what I think I'm worth. And at this last, go around when I left my previous company, I negotiated. I read up on it. It was so uncomfortable for me to come back and say no to somebody because, I kind of wanted to get out of the position I was in, and I was excited about some of the roles that they offered, and I got offered a C-level position in San Francisco, but they were offering me $30,000 less than I was currently making, and I needed to be on site every day. And I told the guy, I said, you aren't going to find anybody as experienced as me, the background that I have, the certifications I have, for that kind of money. I would love to take the role, but no. And he said, thank you. He emailed me back and said, thank you. Our HR department needs to hear that. And there's other places where they said, well, here's your offer, and I counter, and we just never came to an agreement. So it was a learning process for me. I'm so glad I did it because it put me in a better position. And the more you do it, the better you'll become at it. It's not going to, for those of us who aren't experienced in the negotiation process, do it in front of a mirror. Don't be scared of the process, but you're going to have to practice it.
And I think the other part, and the part that is a little bit uncomfortable, is that you find out how much you're worth by talking to the people who do what you do. Right? I mean, the number one thing that works against your ability to negotiate as an individual is the fact that you are negotiating as an individual. I'm one of those people that for the longest time, I have zero issues talking about my salary, talking about my compensation plan. I will actively work to help the people that are my direct reports as well as my peers to understand what's possible and where can we go and what did you get when you signed up so that the next time you go through this process, you will learn something every time you go through it, but learning it without the outside input of the rest of the people who are your peers in the industry, particularly people who are your peers inside the company that you work at. If you work at a large company like a VMware or Microsoft or something like that, that knowledge of how was I treated, how has that changed over time, what are we looking at from a hiring manager standpoint around where are salaries going over time. If you do that process in the dark, it's going to end up working against you. I know that it's one of those things, right? We don't talk about religion, we don't talk about, we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about money. If we don't talk about money, we're leaving it on the table. So my suggestion is find that group of your peers, find that group of people in your industry that you can sit down and have those honest conversations with around what am I worth and what should I be asking for, because you only get that one chance to negotiate.
Just real quick to add on to that, if you have a mentor, someone who you trust, you should have had the money conversation with them. If they are mentoring you, they should be open to explain to you what you're worth. And that is one of the most valuable things you can get from a mentor, is getting a real view into, hey, you should come to this other company where they're going to pay you right because you're underpaid. I originally worked for a school district, and my mentor told me, did you know you're making 30% less than you could? And you would get twice the vacation time and benefits that were, I could not believe I was that underpaid. And the moment I walked out of that school district, my first job out of the school district was a 30% raise. And every job I've taken after that has been at least a 20% raise over that. And my career has financially has taken off. Those 9 years in the school district were valuable, and I loved it. But I had no idea I was underpaid until my mentor finally broke through Midwestern me and said, let's talk about money, because you're not making any.
So what came up about then, you had that number in mind, and they hit it right away. You second guess your number was too low? You don't second guess?
No, I don't think so.
Really? If they hit it right away, you went too low.
If you have a number in mind and they meet it, you can take the gamble, but they met your number, and maybe you weren't a good negotiator this time, but if you really wanted the position to begin with, and honestly, if you're interviewing for a position you really don't want, you're already messed it up. Definitely jump on it.
And with that, right? If they hit the kind of number that you had, and it is in line with what your mentors are telling you and what other people are telling you, you still ask for more. You always ask for more. You go buy a car, you don't like, oh, yeah, I'll take that price.
Maybe more isn't the base salary number.
Exactly. You always ask for more of
I
something.
want to get through some of this before we get into some of those details of the bonuses and the different stock type things and equity and stuff like that. But maybe that answer for more isn't on base. Maybe that number is fine.
Yeah.
Maybe you want more vacation. You mentioned you make more vacation. Maybe vacation matters more to you.
And a good hiring manager will understand the worth of the person that they're trying to hire, right? So if they do hit the number, they've done their research, they know who you are, they've talked to a lot of people in the community already about who you are. So they're going to have a really good idea on what they can offer and hopefully hit that number.
So I'm giving Tim the exception. I'm not putting him on the board because he's running the board, so we can't actually ask the question.
Yeah, my comment was if we hit that number, money isn't the only thing to negotiate. Vacation, time off, extra tchotchkes, going to VMworld every year, whether you speak or not, all kinds of good stuff you can add in. So it's not just money.
Okay, so then how do you handle that part? What if I lose the opportunity when you go to negotiate? So came up with, maybe they give a number, the number was too low. You mentioned they were $45,000 low on you, but if it was an opportunity you really wanted, how do you guys handle that? What's your kind of thought pattern of, is the opportunity really worth it? Is it really an opportunity if they're that low on what they're offering?
Well, I think you have to determine if you're just negotiating for negotiation's sake. Like if you feel you need to ask for something because you haven't yet, that's different than looking at the total compensation of the package and saying, I'm missing the vacation time I need to be with my family, or the equity doesn't look like what I think it should look like based on the role and the market. But if you get an initial offer, I'm going to take the opinion that if it meets your needs, if it's what you want to see, and you feel comfortable with it, it's okay to accept if it works for you. If there are things missing, absolutely go back and bring it up.
I think for me, it's like, I'm going to sound greedy, it is all about the money. For me, I'm a single mom. I've got a kid in college. So I look at my budget and I say, here's a great opportunity. Can I squeeze another $1,000 here, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000? If I can't, I don't care how great of an opportunity it is. If there's no picnic side to it, I'll walk away.
Yeah, it's all business, right? This is probably a form of short or anything, but don't get your feelings hurt. It's okay, right? Yeah, it's not personal, it's just business. It sounds cliche, but move on to the next thing. There are, in our industry, there's a million opportunities out there, and it's not hard to find.
Real quick question. How many of you are hiring managers who hire people? Okay. So, I for one, do not like being ready to send an offer and having to start over with another candidate and another person. I will always try to find, an equitable agreement on an offer and employment, if I can. Once I've decided on somebody, I usually want them. I almost always have somebody that's a backup in case something falls over, but I always want that person.
If we're making you an offer, we've probably talked to 3 people, and interviewing is a huge time drain. Huge time drain. And we finally find that candidate. And we're extremely selective. We're still a very agile company, still extremely. When I find that candidate, I bend over backwards. I go to the co-founders of the company and let's make this happen. I know he's asking for this. I know he's asking. We find a way to make it happen anytime we can. And we move as fast as we can because we know if we don't snatch him, someone else will. So if someone's extending you an offer, you probably have to negotiate just about anything you want at that point, if you're reasonable.
So when it comes to the offer, or when it comes to that point, who gets a number first? You or the employer?
Like I said, I initially start this entire conversation, interview conversation up front with, here is my bottom line. Then we go through the, so if you still want to talk to me, that means we've met that. And in my experience, a lot of times I'll get the offer from the company, and then this last go around, I would shoot back, well, what about this? So I think, so if you're looking at it, I kick off with, here's what I want, at least what I want, in order for us to continue at all.
Most modern HR organizations have salary bands. You've heard about that, right? And you have different grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being the most senior. You can always ask, for this role, what's the range? What band is it at, or like what level is it at? What's the range there? Because they'll say, well, we don't want to put you at the top of the band because we don't give you any room to grow in your salary. I'm like, look, give me 2 years at the top of the band. I'm not going to be in this job in 2 years. You're going to promote me. That's the way I want to operate anyway. I'll be in the next band anyway. So it's a self-correcting problem. But just be mindful of that and talk about that with the potential employer.
So do you guys not think by doing that number, they go, okay, well, that's what I have to pay, versus that's your starting point?
Always let them offer first.
You always let them offer first.
No, like I said, that's the starting point. Like, let's not even waste anybody's time if you can't start at least here. Now, that doesn't mean that after we go through the interview process and I find out, oh, this is what the job entails versus what was in the job description, then that might change. But there's, I don't think you go in and you think, how far off? If your example being $45,000 more, to me that's always been rare. So if you're within a smaller band, it's a lot easier to do some negotiation. If it's a really big difference, it's probably not the right position.
Do you have to answer the question, so what are you making in your current job?
Never answer that question.
Never have to answer that.
A lot, and if you want me to pay more.
Never ever tell them what you're making now, or if you do, bump it up by what you want to leave your current job for. And if they ever ask for salary history, you bust out with, my employers do not allow me to share any of the compensation benefits I'm currently getting. No one needs to know what you were making at your last job, especially not your last 5 jobs. And if you're in one of those positions and they won't move forward, wrong career. They're a terrible company. Move on, find another one.
You're here.
And in some states, it's illegal to ask.
Not in Texas. Nothing's illegal in Texas.
I'm trying to think of something that was illegal.
So one thing though that Jody highlights on, and that kind of overlaps with what I was talking about, also keep in mind that when a rec or a headcount is opened up, it is usually targeted at a certain seniority level. Remember I was talking about those grades? So they may open it up at a 3, and the scenario that I had was they had opened the rec and had it approved at 1 level. I was far superior to the level that they had targeted, and so they had to have approval to make it a senior role. Right? That was that situation, which is why there was such a gap, because I was dealing with 2 different bands in that situation.
So I want to jump a little bit into one of the components of your comp plan. So I think part of the problem, I think for a lot of people, is they don't even know what some of the things in there. So you get asked, and one of the questions, how do you figure out startup stock as part of your comp? But that's a very broad question. I mean, a lot of us have worked for startups along the way, and that's startup stock is not a thing. So, I know you have a specific opinion on this one, Jeremiah.
Well, so just for context, I think I've been through 5 different startups, 2 of which actually had good exits, right? So if you're doing the math at home, it means I failed more than I've succeeded, and I'm still happy with it. The startup stock thing is going to be all over the place, right? Josh and I worked at a startup where the CEO of the startup was on his 3rd, and he had very different ideas about how equity was going to be given out at that startup than someone who may be doing their first startup in downtown San Francisco and is throwing equity at everyone that ends up getting hired. It's also going to be very different depending on the size of the company. If you're the first 10 people in the door, first 50 people in the door, and there's no product yet, the only way that they have to keep you excited through that whole process is the promise of equity down the road. If you, like Josh and I, come into a startup that has 300 people and has a product and has a go-to-market and is just looking for that last hockey stick ramp of growth before they get acquired, the amount of equity that you're going to get out of that is going to be very different. Again, this is going to go back to talk to the people who work at the company, talk to the people who are hiring at the company. Look at use all of the resources. We make fun of ladders and we make fun of all the different websites that are out there. But especially for established companies, you're going to get good directional guidance about where to go with it. The important part to remember is it's worth literally nothing unless you have an exit. So going in and saying, I'm going to risk this job or this offer on a huge amount of equity, knowing that that equity literally gets you nothing at all unless that company sells and, where's Tim Antonowitz, sells for enough money that your stock is worth something. There's I was going to be nice to you. There's more that goes into it. There's more that goes into it than just how much salary or how much equity can you get out of it. Because the founders of the company are going to take the exit that they can, and that's going to end up impacting the amount of that. So again, my suggestion is it goes back to, what do you need to pay the bills? What do you need for that base to be in order for you to be happy with what you can get out of it? And then look at any sort of equity or stock options or grants or anything else that they're giving you literally as gravy. If it becomes real money, great. We can go buy a boat, we can go buy a car. If it doesn't become real money, I still was able to pay my mortgage. So I would say that, how do you figure out stock startup as part of your comp? Figure out how to build your comp so that it works, and then get as much stock out of it as you possibly can, hoping that one of those exits is going to happen that'll net you some cash. Does that make sense?
How many of you know the difference between an option, an RSU, and a grant? One of you want to take that? Because that was not very many people that raised their hands.
So I can take a stab at it.
I'll correct you if you're wrong.
You can Google all of this stuff, by the way. An RSU, restricted stock unit, right, it has a value. Most of the time, a longer established company is going to give out RSUs as part of a salary compensation, right? So you can depend on that, you invest it, you can depend on that as part of your bonus structure on a yearly basis. Everybody. So the question was, what is vesting? So vesting is a time period that elapses that has trigger points. Most often, whether it's an option or an RSU, you'll vest the first year and you'll hit a cliff of, say, 25%. And then every 3 months or 6 months, or sometimes yearly, you'll hit another percentage of your total stock allotment that you're given as part of your company.
And how long is reasonable to wait for something to vest?
So, based on my experience, my cliffs have been, the first one was 1 year. I had 25% of the total stock compensation, and then, depending on the company, 3 months or 6 months.
And then how long until you return the investment?
4 years.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the math, right? If you're going to change, right? But with the vesting, it will vest over a period of time, right? So as part of your bonus, you'll get X amount of shares of stock, and those shares of stock when they get handed to you, you don't get any of them. And so then you'll vest them over a period of time. Some companies I've seen will vest over 5 or 6 or 7 years for you to be able to actually do something with that stock, sell it. Right. You're gonna what's the average? 4.7 years for a job, or 3.7 years? If they're going to stretch that out over more than 4 years, I would say walk away from it. That's not a reasonable amount of time to wait for the money that you've earned.
Yeah, I have a long time ago, when I was out in the Bay Area during the big .com growth back in about 98, 99. I worked for a small startup, and I tweeted this a couple of days ago because the question came up on Twitter about stock options and what you're worth and everything. I got some options. The company was in existence for another 15, 20 years. The employees that I worked with never saw one dime of their money that they were granted. There were changes, there were acquisitions, they were lower on the stock structure than everyone else. Some of them had actually exercised those options and bought them and put money into them, and they lost that money. So there's a great, you go back into my Twitter feed, there's a great New York Times article about this. And some of the people that are listed in there I worked with, I felt their pain because when I walked away and went out to the job in the Valley, I left that. I did not exercise my options. And I had people saying I was crazy. They're like, you're crazy, why don't you...
What's that mean, exercising your options?
So that means I had 5,000 options. I could exercise at a penny or $1 or whatever it was.
Right, so you were given stock, but you had to still go buy it?
I had to buy it from the company in order to make it mine. But it's still worth nothing. It's still paper until it's worth something. For many, many years, as I've watched a lot of my friends out in the Bay Area get rich at .coms, I kept thinking myself, I left that money on the table. Am I dumb, or did I go for security versus, shoot for the moon? And I don't think that anymore because there's times it never pans out.
And that's a big difference between RSUs and options. Is options you actually have to pay for. Most of the time, RSUs are given at a $0 to the employee, right? So when you cash out, you make 100% of that profit rather than having to buy the options, and then you make the difference of that you can actually sell it.
Yeah, and understanding tax burdens on those types of things is very important.
And it's also really important to keep in mind, how these are actually used. Right? Options are offered out to entice you with the promise of future wealth. RSUs are handed out and said, you know what, you've done a really good job, we don't want you to go anywhere. We're going to try to keep you around as long as we possibly can. There's very different motivations in the end, they want you to stick around, but very different emotions that they throw out with that.
Real quick, I wanted to mention one option that I have heard folks talk about. It's not relatively new. It's something that we do at Island. It's called phantom stock. And phantom stock is even faker than RSUs. The beautiful thing about a phantom stock is there's absolutely nothing to it until the company either is bought or IPOs. There's no tax burden. You just know you have this phantom stock that matches the stock price should the company IPO. So it eliminates a lot of the tax concerns, but again, it's not real until there's an exit. In 99, I got burnt in 98 and 99 so bad by options, it scared me into working government for 9 years. So when I hear the other folks talking about options, and I was watching my friends get bought by Microsoft and get bought by Yahoo, and that was still a good thing. And meanwhile, I'm working for companies that get bought by Novell and get run into the ground and things like that. So truly, there's high risk. Make sure you've covered what you need financially. I think that was the most important thing I heard. Make sure you've got enough money, because the phantom money it's like going to Vegas. If we were in Vegas, I'd say just put something on 36 or 00 at the roulette table. That's what an option feels like. a lot of times.
So, came up as vesting something that can be negotiated.
Yes. So at a startup, right? So there's a term, single trigger and double trigger, right? Single trigger means if you are acquired, then you can fully vest 100% of your options immediately. Double trigger is if you are acquired or you IPO, you can vest 100% of your options immediately. So those are both great things if you can to negotiate for, because if there is any type of exit, you will hopefully make money on
Positive exit.
Positive exit. And one of the things that I've done in the past is there's almost always a cliff, right? So maybe the stock vests quarterly, except you don't vest any stock at all for the first 12 months. Right, so at 12 months you get the entire first year, and then it drips out over the rest of the time. At a startup, the risk that you run is that you show up and 60 days later the company gets acquired and you vested nothing, right? And now you have to hope that whoever did the acquisition is going to convert that into something that can be used, because technically you don't have anything. So one of the things that you can negotiate for, and that I've done at startups before, is to say, look, if something happens before a certain agreed upon amount of time, before I have the ability to earn the equity that you're giving me, we're going to use that as one of the triggers to be able to vest everything. So if I show up and we get bought in 90 days and I haven't had a chance to establish myself or to vest any of that stock, then I want to be able to vest all of it or vest some of it, but you can certainly negotiate that portion of it, because there's nothing, and we've had friends that have done it, where you show up and you've got this great job offer with all of this equity, and 30 days later the company gets acquired and you haven't vested anything. You have no part of that transaction at all.
So I think you had to negotiate between common and preferred stock. Have you ever had a choice? You always have common stock? Always preferred.
Yeah, solid farmers all preferred.
See both, that's fine.
How many can vote?
How many can vote?
Preferred can't vote. That's why it's preferred. You just gave them money and you can't say anything to do with it.
Okay, so we'll hit a couple more that are up here. So, thoughts on contract versus permanent?
I work at a company that does a shocking amount of business with contract employees, and I hate it.
You hate the contractors?
I hate the idea of not hiring.
There's a lot of pushback on that question.
I hate the idea of contract positions, particularly when they are used not because the position is a temporary position, but because it is a financial instrument to keep from paying those people the salary or the benefits or all of the rest of the things that go with the job instead. I mean, I respect that there are times, and there are probably independent folks in here who work from contract to contract for different vendors or for different events, and I totally understand that. It would be really hard for me, as someone who is a full-time employee at a company, to look at the option of taking, or if faced with the choice of taking a contract position, to look on that favorably.
It's 100% my perspective about benefits and healthcare. 100%.
So that actually, to me, leads to the other question there. Is the environment in tech today so stable that you could think about leaving a senior government job for it? Because I think most people that end up in government jobs do it for the benefits.
So government jobs. I was in a situation where year after year there were layoffs. In school districts in particular, there constantly was budget cuts. I actually left the school district in 2009 to go work for a subprime mortgage company after the 2008 crash. It was more stable than the school district. So my advice is, I still have one good friend still at the Houston School District who has been there now for, I think, 22 years. He's got his eye on his retirement that the school systems in Texas participated. So if you're really established in a government job, you don't see things changing around you, and you don't feel the need to change, you're probably institutionalized at this point, and going into a private, the private industry is probably going to be a shock. It can be less stable than a government job. It can be a lot easier to get fired if you're not doing a good job. I was always confident that I was one of the 50% in the government job that was doing 100% of the work. So I had no doubt that I was going to go on to the next job. And stability in the private sector didn't bother me. But if you've been in a government job for a long time, you've got a lot of seniority. It's probably a lot bigger risk, especially when you've got whatever retirement that government job has. On the flip side, when I look at how they kept changing the retirement package for me, originally I was going to retire at 55, and then it became 59, and then it became 67. And Texas kept changing retirement. So it was just another thing pushing me out the door saying, I'd rather control this in a 401k than this state-run retirement system. So those are the kind of things you think about. It's something we haven't mentioned, but hopefully everyone here is putting money in some kind of retirement beyond Social Security. And we haven't talked about it. I think that's one of the most important topics. If you're not putting everything you can in a 401k, do. That's the one financial advice I'll give you. It's the best thing my wife ever did to me. She made me save money for my retirement. You're going to live to be
That's the best thing your wife has ever done for you?
Yes. She's giving me a child, and there's all those other things we're not talking about here. But she financially has shown me I'm going to live till I'm 80, and I'm going to be able to retire before I'm 79.
So I think one of the things that comes up with that, and you mentioned the benefits, and as you're negotiating, you guys take into account cost of healthcare and cost of benefits, and or things like 401k contributions when you're looking at that total comp package. And how much does that weigh into it versus just what the dollar and bonus is?
So that's as important, if not more, than your base salary, in my opinion. Right? Because your health costs and your retirement, if there's no match, if your health insurance costs are higher than what you're paying now, you may have a higher base salary, but you're going to end up taking home less money than you did initially. So there's a lot of diligence you have to do in basic math to make sure you're not going to come out short-handed just because you have a higher base.
And one of the things that I did when we got to the final offer and negotiation was every company that I was interviewing with, we got to that point, they provided a copy of their benefits plan, and I went through that with fine-tooth comb with the health insurance, and I sat there and I contrasted it with my current one. Okay, so if I go to this company, can I keep my current health plan? I was with Kaiser for a very, very long time. But are my, what's my out of pocket? Is there a deductible? Or is it, is there just if it's a couple dollars more a month, I'm okay with that. But if it's a totally different shift, let me tell you, there's a lot of time and money that could be involved. I also look at things like vacation. Can I work from home? I'll tell you that my new position allows me to work from home for part of the week, and then I travel over the city. When I started doing the math on how much money I was spending to commute to my prior job, in terms of your car loan, your insurance, time, gas, versus, okay, now I'm at this job where I don't even need a car and I can get rid of my car, I put that in the column of, okay, there's another $10,000 a year. That's money that's back in my pocket if I go for this other job where there's more flexibility. So you look at the total picture and your benefits and your the structure of how you're actually working should be included in that.
I think it's when I went to Microsoft, and I've been there now, I guess about 16 or 17 months. The companies that I was interviewing with, there was a huge gulf in health insurance in particular. There are a group of companies who've decided that the healthcare cost in the U.S. is ridiculous, and we're just going to take this off the table from a negotiating or from a competitive standpoint. Microsoft is one of them that just says, we're going to pay for this. There's not going to be anything that comes out of your check from a health insurance standpoint. You get to pick your plan, and away you go. You have to be a certain kind of company to afford to be able to do that. There are some startups. We got pretty lucky with the startup that Josh and I were at because they were late stage enough that they had the money to be able to do that. But there was a huge gulf with the people that I was interviewing with between health insurance plans that were going to be very much a burden to me or a difference from where I was coming from to the larger companies. And so it kind of goes back to the question about are the large tech companies in a place where it's a good reason to move away from a government role? I think for healthcare, you can probably just take that off the table. Most of the large technology companies at this point, they actually give me every month, here's how much we have invested in you for the healthcare side of things. Right? It doesn't show up as income, but they certainly put it on the, here's what you
they
did.
let you know.
Right. They make sure to let you know. So just as you're interviewing with people, recognize that they're probably going to fall on one or a very different side of that gulf when it comes to the cost of health insurance.
And one last note, because based on what they said, if you have a spouse or a significant other that is engaged and is part of your healthcare plan, part of your benefits package, and consume it, make sure you communicate the entirety of your benefits and your total earnings that you're looking at. Because when I switched over to Splunk, it changed to a different healthcare provider, which, we got to negotiate and make sure we're going to be in network with the doctors, we have to check all that. But the prescription plan wasn't as good as what I had at NetApp. So the very first month after I switched jobs, my wife was like, I hate this new company. Why? Because my prescription is $20 more a month. But it's a legit, it's something that you feel, right? And it set that, perspective. So just be really thoughtful about that. And you can always inquire, if you have certain medications, you can inquire what it's going to cost under a new plan. So just communicate that.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of back up what Josh said. My daughter has some special needs, so anytime that I look at moving between companies, I always look to make sure that the doctors that she goes to today are there with the new insurance and whatever new company they want to. So just take the time. It takes 10 minutes, but it's definitely something I look out for.
I think we've got about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to hit a couple of these questions. Non-compete agreements, I think, would anybody argue that they are not piles of flaming shit that should not exist?
Oh, they absolutely should not exist.
Okay. But they do.
They do exist.
They do exist. I think there was a great blog post the other day about one of the non-competes that Amazon was putting in place for someone who was looking for a job there, and he kind of went through and talked about all of the challenges that he had with the non-compete. So they're basically terrible. There are companies that will enforce them. There are companies that won't enforce them, and then there's states where they're completely illegal. So
it's a right to work state. It's illegal.
Yep, they're real
a right to work state. If it is, it's illegal. They don't mean anything. And really all it means at that point is your new company willing to put more money for attorneys than your old company. And make sure you talk about that in negotiations.
It's just a terrible place to be as a new employee. They are real things. Know what your rights are, know what you're going into, and know that if a company decides they want to outspend whoever it is you go work for next, and make sure that you don't work for anybody in that technology sector. If you signed it, it's a possibility.
Real quick on non-competes, one of the easiest ways to not have to ever worry if you do have a non-compete and you're leaving somewhere is leave on good terms. Let them know you're leaving. If you're going to a direct competitor on your 2-week notice, let them know. And I know that's an uncomfortable thing, but an easy exit eliminates a lot of confusion 2 weeks later when you're at the new job and the new job says, we just got a letter and we decided to not pursue your employment any further. I have lost a job in that exact fashion due to a non-compete, and the company I went to said, we're not doing this, you're on your own, we're pushing you out the door.
And you need to be very clear when you get to the new company. If a question comes about the old company, your first answer is, I can't talk about that.
That leads me to one of my favorite approaches between changing companies. When I'm changing companies, I give 3 weeks notice. Because if they perceive it as a competitor, they may walk me out and still gotta pay me.
I used to, because I worked in security, the last 2 people that worked in my department, as soon as they gave their notice, they were walked out like 20 minutes later. They don't mess around. So when I knew I was leaving, I used to joke that I was going to give 10 weeks notice. So I gave 4 weeks notice, thinking, either I'll get walked out today or whatever. They're like, is that all you can give us? I'm like,
So let's try to hit these ask 2 questions, and we'll kind of go down the line. We only have about 3 or 4 minutes. If you can kind of hit each one, pick one that you want to hit, and then your one tip that you would tell people during the negotiation process. So, Jeremiah, you start. What I want.
I think number 1 is a personal preference deal. I am always 100% open to discuss coworker salary with coworkers or peers. If any of you have questions about Microsoft or anywhere else, I'm always willing to have that conversation. My back and forth at the last job, we had exactly 1. I did a lot of prep up front to get the offer that I wanted. I did my normal, okay, you have to counteroffer at least once. The response I got from the recruiter was 1 word, and that word was seriously. I was like, no, I'm good. I'll take it. It's fine just the way it is. So there was 1 back and forth. It was a very brief one. And my biggest tip to everyone is leverage the people around you. This is not a zero-sum game. This is all of us can be successful, and all of us can find a comp plan that lets us take care of our families, that lets us take care of our lives. But we have to be comfortable, in at least broad terms, talking about what that means and what is possible for us to be able to do as we move from company to company.
Yeah, so if you do discuss your salary with your coworkers, much like Jeremiah, I'm fine talking about it. However, understand that that person may get their feelings hurt in the background and end up quitting. And that happened to me when I was at a startup. Yeah, I mean, it can be good and it can be bad because you may be getting some benefit that person feels they should get, but aren't. So there's always that. How many times back and forth? To be honest, I haven't had to do too much, but when I do my negotiations, it's always on the phone with the recruiter or the hiring manager, never via email, because I want them to hear my voice and understand that I'm not being a smartass or being sarcastic with anything you're saying. And then, I guess one biggest, my follow-up or last tip, much like Jeremiah said, use the community, talk to people, everybody in this room I know, and most of the people at the conference are willing to help each other out, and everybody's open to helping everybody else.
So, as a manager, I ask, please don't talk to your coworkers about salary. I can't think of a worse situation that could probably happen on a Friday as I think I'm going to have a good weekend. Seriously though, I'm a Midwesterner. I'm originally from the Chicago area. I personally would never talk to my coworkers about my salary or anyone else. You're welcome to. I can't do that. I can barely talk to my wife about my salary. And we laugh about this. It's a Midwest thing. Back and forth, if you've gone back and forth 2-3 times, you've probably gone overboard on negotiating. It's getting a little ridiculous. And advice. My biggest piece of advice. So I'm Gen X. Ask for more vacation time. Take vacation time in lieu of a raise. Take time off. Go see the world. Meet people. Do fun things. This work stuff is temporary. And don't do it till you die.
I don't discuss my salary with coworkers unless they're my friends. There's that circle of trust there, and I have no problem doing that. The back and forth, I think the most I've done is 2, and I was completely satisfied. My biggest piece of advice, and I'll make it a little bit HR friendly. When you get your bonus every year, put away half of that into a screw you account. And I will tell you, I've had a screw you savings account so that anytime I got unhappy at a job, I knew I could walk away at any time, and I had 6 months of salary, and I didn't have to stay in a situation which I didn't like. That knowledge gives you a lot of freedom when you're discussing salary. So at my last job, where I did take a slight pay cut, I knew that if I couldn't cover that find that extra money out of my budget, I had a savings account where I could. And I knew, I had faith in myself that I was going to make that up within a year. And I did. But you got to have that screw money.
Can either of you
On discussing salary with coworkers, I've never done that. Not comfortable doing it for various reasons that have been discussed before. I've come to find over the years that with anything financially based, it's specifically with comp, it's not what's fair, it's what you negotiate, right? And people negotiate differently and not as well. So if you're very good at it, you can talk your way into things and do things. You may be in a better spot than your coworker. So try to avoid that as much as possible.
Josh, wrap us up.
Okay, that's fine. I'll tie it all into one tip. Understand the band. Understand what band you're in, where you are in the band. Because if you have any conversation with anybody else about salary, it's going to be lacking important context. And if you're uncertain about why you're in a certain part of your band, talk to your manager. Because it may be that you just lack specific skills that they look for in a higher part of the band, and you can start working on those.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I know we have one more person coming up. We've got one more sponsor that we'd love you guys to hang around for a minute so you can hear from them because they do help us a ton to put this on. So we're going to let Chris talk for some reason. We're going to do some silly Josh stock.
So just said earlier we get hugged because we've had a moment. So
Chris Galati, I'm with Cohesity. I'm not going to really speak very long because everybody's gone through a lot of stuff. I just want to cover a couple things that we're doing this week and thank everybody for coming. But we do have our 18-wheeler here this week. It will be at the ballpark for a tailgate on Monday night. And then definitely come by the booth and check out some of the demos that we put together. Other than that, do we still have one? No, we don't have any more demos. Ballgame tickets for Monday, DM myself or Teresa or John Hildebrand. And the other thing I want to plug is because there's been conversations about the IT burnout piece and work-life balance. We actually have an actual VMworld session. I think it's full right now, but you can get that on the wait list on Wednesday. It's actually a panel session, so we're going to bring up some folks that we might see here if questions come up. I know we talked to Josh a little bit, come up and talk. But that's it. I just want to thank you guys for coming by and just come see Cody.
So first off, I want to make sure before he walks away, Brian does a fun to let this happen. So please give Brian that.
But it's definitely not just me. So Mike, thank you. Jeremiah, thank you. Ariel, if you're still here. We've all been instrumental making this happen. So thank you guys for helping out there. This is the end for now. So come back to the VMunderground. Same place. The big difference is you're going to enter through a door in that room back there. So make sure you go to that door. It should be open and well signed. We will be